How did the Florida Panthers get their name? We're going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Welcome here to this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And we are doing a little bit of a special episode today in relation to the Florida Panthers, the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. And with obviously the Panthers winning the Cup, them being 30 years of existing in the South Florida market, now it's time to tell the story of the Florida Panthers and how they got to their name and everything prior to that. And who better to be joining me for this edition of the show to discuss everything about the history of the Florida Panthers. You have heard him multiple times on the show. He is Florida Panthers historian Francisco Oporta. Francisco, welcome back to the show once again, my friend.
Yeah, we're recording this 1 month since the greatest day in franchise history. The Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup in Game 7 over the Edmonton Oilers, who I think a lot of people today also are really glad the Panthers beat them.
Yeah, and there's some news there on the new GM hire, but we'll discuss that on another day. But yeah, I did rewatch Game 7. Very thankful to just experience that over again and just kind of remembering sequences. It's going to come to a point for me where I'm going to even memorize Sean McDonough's play-by-play calls and knowing what he says. I mean, I kind of already know that from 2003 Game 6 for the Florida Marlins against the Chicago Cubs, and 2013 Game 6 for the ABC broadcast with Mike Breen and everything. So yeah, history with this market and everything. But we're gonna really discuss more of really how the Florida Panthers got their name. Obviously, December 10th, 1992 is a very, very important day in just not just forget the name of the Panthers for just a little moment here, but just the fact that South Florida is was getting a hockey team at the time. The year before, Ottawa and St. Petersburg got the teams. Crazy to think that now, looking 30 years later, that a baseball stadium was starting off with hockey instead of baseball, a baseball specific stadium. But then a year later, the South Florida is approved for a team.
So I wanted to say on my Panthers historian X account, you can put your birth date there. So my birthday, which is not my personal birthday, but it is December 10th, 1992.
Wow.
So for anybody that follows me, that's the Easter egg right there. And I do the same thing for the Marlins historian one, where it's I think it's June or July 10th, 1991 or something like that. So yeah.
I'm trying to think. That's actually the same birthday for the Locked On Florida Panthers page. Crazy thing, John Acosta, anthem singer, asked me if that was my actual birthday. I'm like, no, there's a reason for that. It's the existence of the team, of them first getting an expansion team. But for this, Francisco, when we talk about really how the Panthers got their name and all the rights that we're going and think about, and there's so much relation. Yeah, you mentioned the Marlins earlier, but there's also kind of ties into not only baseball coming to South Florida, but an attempt for an ownership group, not just with and not related to hockey in the Tampa Bay area, trying to actually get the Florida Panthers to actually be their name of a specific team. So I want to give you the floor in this being your level of expertise on what could have been the Panthers and possibly not this region getting that name.
So, I mean, you have to think back late 80s, early 90s. Florida, the state in general, was starting to boom. More and more people starting to move to all parts of areas, Florida, Orlando, Tampa Bay, even Jacksonville, and of course South Florida, Miami, Broward, Palm Beach counties. So sports here was really just you had the Dolphins, you had the Buccaneers, and then you had the college teams with FSU, UF, and Miami. And suddenly you start getting an in when the Heat are NBA grants the Miami Heat and the Orlando Magic in back-to-back years.
Right, years. Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly there was a push for baseball. Now, baseball has had spring training in Florida in general for decades and decades. So that was something that, well, now we're going to have a consistent major league presence. And late 90s, National League wanted to expand, and there were tons of bids from different regions, DC, Denver, Colorado, and there were actually three in Florida. It was the Tampa Bay area, Orlando, and South Florida and Miami. Now, Wayne Huizenga eventually did win it, got the Marlins. He was big pocket owner, Waste Management, Blockbuster Video. And so he had the funds to support a team. Of course, they liked the singular ownership as well. So they granted him the baseball team, and he eventually named it the Marlins. However, there was the Tampa Bay bid group that was trying to get a team or a major league team over there, and they had already started reserving trademarks, including Panthers.
Mm-hmm.
So once the Marlins had been solidified by Huizenga as what would be the team's name for the baseball team, then he eventually goes to the NHL. He wins a bid for a team in South Florida, in Miami, to start, and he needed a name. Marlins have already been taken, and looking at different names, and obviously state animal is Panthers.
Mm-hmm.
So Florida Panther, literally it's the name of the animal. Florida Panthers, but he had to get the naming rights, which he bought from the Tampa Bay group that was trying to get a baseball team in Tampa.
Yeah, and just looking back, just pulled up the tab for Tropicana Field just to see the gap between the build of that versus when the Tampa Bay Lightning originally moved there. They broke ground there in 1986. And to think that it took 12 years from 86 to 1998 for the Rays to actually begin playing baseball there too. So a big project. The city of St. Pete manipulated Major League Baseball. Let's be real. Into getting.
I mean, Tropicana Field was built to entice a team to relocate.
Yeah.
So the Giants almost relocated, the White Sox, the Mariners. They tried so many times, and they lost one bid, and then they eventually got a bid, and their team is still there. But lo and behold, they might finally be able to get a new team or a new stadium in St. Petersburg right next to it. But that's baseball. So moving on to hockey.
Yep. And for the Panthers, now there's different things going as trying to put the management group together.
They had just a matter of months to put this team together. They won the bid on December 10th, 1992. Opening night was in October of 93. So they had less than a year to have the expansion drafts, design a logo, trademark the names, get the lease on the Miami Arena, figure out the scheduling because they still shared with the Miami Heat at that time, figure all of that out, marketing, season tickets, the whole shebang, selecting the players, expansion draft, training camp, what their practice facility would be, and then opening night. Just a mad dash to try and put that team together.
Yeah, and then trying to get your corporate offices too, which you're starting to, you go to one location and then trying to get a building nearby so that at least you're still in the proximity. And even there's also a story of just about not even being familiar, the ownership group not even being familiar with the sport yet, but just trying to actually get into the sport and trying to learn more about it. So it's like, hey, this is a different venture here.
And they also had to not only themselves learn, but teach South Florida as well, because the reason the NHL chose South Florida as a viable location for hockey. And lo and behold, it does work. All right, Canada, it does work. You see, it worked pretty well about a month ago now. But one of the things was, of course, plenty of corporate sponsorship in South Florida, the Latin capital of America, of the world, really, essentially, and a huge finance sector here in South Florida as well. And the beauty of the snowbirds brings lots of business coming down here. The winter sports, the Miami Heat, the Miami Dolphins, and the Panthers do well just on that alone. And all of that helped to try and prop up the team, but they still had to teach the locals what hockey was. And it's funny that they had to teach them during the broadcasts on Sunshine Network what certain things meant, what icing meant, what all these other things meant. And another connection with Blockbuster Video, Huizenga had lots of VHS tapes that would be sold at Blockbuster locations, including one where it's John Van Beesbrook, the Panthers goalie, teaching people hockey terms. I still have yet to find that video. I have not found it on eBay. I don't have a VHS player, and it's not on YouTube. So someone's got to have it, and I think we might have to put a bounty on it.
Well, you might have to travel across the country because I believe there's only one Blockbuster left, and it's in Portland, Oregon.
Well, they probably don't have a Florida Panthers VHS tape.
Chances are they do not over there. We're going to take a quick pause from our conversation with myself and Francisco Oporta, Florida Panthers historian, to tell you guys all about FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, and I never want them to stop. But the playoffs have been done for a while, and we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. With that, so the Panthers putting everything together with assigning Bobby Clark as the GM, Bill Torrey bringing him the architect there for the Florida Panthers. After all the work that he's done with the New York Islanders during his time of building that dynasty in the early '80s, but with Huizenga owning the rights to the name the Panthers, it still had to go down to a vote too. But with the Panthers, they announced that 6,400 votes from fans in a release announced that it'll be the Florida Panthers. That will be their name. And part of me goes back to also just the conservation efforts that they attempt. Obviously, they have a great relationship with, at the time it was called Miami Metro Zoo, now called Zoo Miami, and even there's dedication with the current arena that they're in. You enter, it's on the right hand side when you enter near the elevators. On that side, you see the display there inside the arena. But you actually have an image of the evolution of the logos for the Panthers on what it could have looked like versus what it ended up being. So if you want to show us that there.
Yeah. So like I said, mad dash for them to try and put together a team and have everything ready to go, logos, uniforms, what have you. And they finally were set on the name. So there we go. So that was good. But then they eventually had to figure out what logo they were going to go with. And you can still see this at Emirates Bank Arena. It's, I forgot what section it is, but it used to be the Panthers Ice Den. And you're seeing concepts now. Here's a concept. It was shown on Aesthetics YouTube channel, fantastic channel. If anybody wants to know anything about hockey iconography and uniforms and logos, this was one of the concepts. You notice that it's in teal, black, white, and yellow. A little akin to the Marlins colors because Huizenga and his wife especially were very taken with the teal color scheme. And as the baseball gods intended, it was supposed to be teal for the Marlins, but they almost had it for the Panthers. And Bill Torrey, the architect of the Islanders dynasty, was the first general manager of the Florida Panthers. And he nixed that idea completely. He's like, nope, we're not doing that. We're not going to be some silly 90s team. And so straight up, red, navy blue, white, yellow, that's it. Okay, fine. And it's the traditional colors of the Panthers now. The yellows turned into more of a gold now, but it's still within their repertoire anyways. But you're seeing here the concepts that are up in the arena, so you can still see them. I took these photos during the Stanley Cup final just to I always love seeing them. I always love passing by and seeing like just the evolution of the you see the sun, which they eventually would use for the hockey stick and tree logo. The way that they had like a profile view of the Panthers, it was leaping. It had one claw forward, one claw back, both claws kind of positioned differently, and then eventually they got to what would become the original logo of the Panthers, and had that logo from 93 up to 2016 when they changed the logo to the Shield logo now, and they have a modernized version of the Leaping Cat, as we affectionately call it now. And so they had different concepts of everything. I especially if I had to, I like you see the middle one that says Panthers kind of across with the full body Panther. If they had to go with a different one, I might have chosen that one.
Oh, I like that middle one.
Yeah, but the Leaping Cat looks fantastic. I might take a stab at those myself, and maybe when I'm bored, hop on Illustrator and do those and see how they turn out. Just for fun, just for fun.
It's so funny because that one at the very bottom with the Panther reaching, looks very similar to the FIU one.
Yeah,
the FIU Golden Panthers, excuse me, right before they changed it.
Yeah.
Yes.
For whatever team UCF drops Golden, I'm sure the Golden Knights are going to drop Golden at some point as well. So
yeah, so I mean, if the Florida Panthers and the Vegas Golden Knights had a baby, it'd be the FIU Golden Panthers more than likely.
I don't know. Oh well, and just an aside, did you see the Lake Tahoe? Was it the monsters, whatever they called it, the Lake Monsters, or so they have the iconography for the Golden Knights' entire organization from the NHL, AHL, and ECHL is fantastic, by the way. They had knights, they have the Silver Knights, which has like a horse logo, and now they've got dragons. The medieval fantastical theme is fantastic. If there's one thing I got to give Vegas credit for, it's that.
Oh, they know how to put on a show prior to their games too. But yeah, the logo design for the Panthers and getting it there, and multiple ideas, and they ended up being the Leaping Panther. That it's funny because Kendall Ice Arena, of all the teams that they have on display up in their fair share of rafters, they still have the old Panthers logo. They still don't have the new one. So
I don't know. They probably got that back in '93. It's probably faded in color and everything. It's still up there.
They still have the old Sharks logo. They still have So they still have an old LA Kings logo there too. So there hasn't been many adjustments over there and modernized. But so it's crazy because when you think about even the reveal of the uniform, exactly a week before they had their reveal, the Panthers were on the Today Show announcing that they will be of the announcement of the uniform too. And hey, it's crazy because me being here in Central Florida, and even with a Today Cafe in the theme park, it's crazy to think how going back there. I mean, even now in the modern in 2024. I mean, going back to last year, Matthew Tkachuk being on the NHL on TNT, being on Pat McAfee, but then you think about back then being on a major morning program. You think about the typical American going to their 9 to 5, and then what are a lot of people doing, especially with how cable was back then. Remember, you couldn't call if you wanted to use your landline. Well, the internet with the internet and everything, it cut off your internet too. But even with
But
even with,
even 93, even 93, the internet was even mainstream for
yeah,
a lot of people. People didn't get the internet until maybe the late 90s.
yeah,
Maybe.
yeah. So even with that, with them, with a lot of people, they're getting their coffee, eating their breakfast, and going to work. And look at that. The Florida Panthers are one of the first things on their screen in June 7th of 1993 that they will be revealing their new uniforms. And then on June 14th, 1993, the Florida Panthers announced that officially put together their uniforms, and we're going to do a little bit of a screen share here. This has been a photo that we've seen, that the iconic photo of Wayne Huizinga, of him dropping the puck, him having the sweater, which the varsity sweater. I think it's called a varsity sweater.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, but I actually kind of want that, to be quite honest. But
It's at the Den of Honor as well, the former Den of Honor as well. It's hung there, right next to, it's a Huizenga one, but also I think because he had more than one of them. He wore them. He wore that to the final game that he appeared in when the
yes,
Panthers honored him and retired number 37. And then shortly afterwards he passed away. But it's in the Den of Honor next to a Vincent Viola camouflage Panthers jersey. A digital camo Panthers jersey as well. So, but you can still see that over there, and it's got the hybrid stick and palm tree logo with the circle, the roundel with Florida Panthers and the Panther head in the front, which is one of my favorite logos of that original set. It kind of just an amalgamation of all the just the really, really good branding that they did and put together in such a short amount of time. And if you see the striping on the Panthers uniform, the reason that it was angled and it was made at an angle instead of just being straight flat like other hockey jerseys is for that positioning alone. When you're doing the face off, they kind of wanted it to look like it was all cohesive in that sense. So that's the reason they made it angular like that.
mm-hmm.
So it's just some weird things that I picked up along the way.
Yeah. So very, very interesting fact.
Oh, and you forgot the gloves.
Oh,
The gloves.
Let's put the screen share back on the screen. The gloves.
Yeah, so you can notice the gloves had Panther claws on them.
Mm-hmm.
They initially were going to do that, but then it might have been Bill Torrey as well, or the NHL, or maybe even the manufacturers. Like, look, we can't do that, and they nixed that as well. Just like, you know what, just regular gloves. We're not going to do anything silly like that. Although I will say, if the Panthers do get that Winter Classic or Stadium Series at Lone Depot Park,
they have to.
They should do that.
Yes.
It's one game. Just do that.
Yeah. And remember, this was at the time where the white jerseys were the home jerseys for home teams, and the red was the road jerseys. So maybe we see a little bit of that for the Winter Classic. Who knows? If that.
It doesn't. They're talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Bettman and the Marlins and the Panthers have all confirmed. They've started talking, trying to figure out those logistics.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let's see if they can make it work. But now let's move on to we went into detail of the expansion draft earlier in the week about the picks and everything. But I want to talk about a very important moment in the history of the franchise too, where there was a coin toss to determine the draft, not only in 93, but going into the very next year for the Panthers. And there's a coin toss between the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim and the Florida Panthers to determine if you win the toss, you get the 5th overall pick in the 1993 draft, and then the 1st overall pick automatically, no matter what happens, in 94. Or you get a chance at a 4th pick in 93, and then the 2nd in the very next year. And with the Panthers, they won the toss, and they said, anytime you get a chance to get the number 1 overall pick, you take it. And it's crazy to think that what happened in the drafts of those years in 1993 and 1994 too, because you think about the picks that happened in those drafts, Francisco. A few picks that happened before the Panthers was Chris Pronger, Hall of Fame defenseman there, and then another one for in the NHL entry draft. The what and there's no guarantee, obviously, that the Panthers would have picked them, but Hall of Famer Paul Kariya was the pick right before the very first draft pick in Florida Panthers history in Rob Niedermeyer too. So that's one thing. Which Paul Kariya was on that 2003 Ducks team that lost to New Jersey Devils in the Stanley Cup Final in 03, where the year that J.S. Giguere won the Conn Smythe too. It's crazy to think.
Losing.
Yeah, while losing, yes.
Mhm.
Hey, happened this year too. So that not the first time that's happened. But crazy to think too, the very next pick in that draft in the 93 draft, Victor Kozlov. Who would have thought that years later,
That's great.
Victor Kozlov would end up with the Florida Panthers as Pavel Bure's running mate there too. And crazy to think, the 94 draft, the very actually, let's not get to the 94 draft yet. But it's crazy also because that was the time where the draft was expanded in multiple rounds. Our current draft system that the NHL has didn't come around until 2005, the 04-05 lockout, where it was a fixed 7 rounds. So if you guys are wondering about the extension of the draft and the multiple rounds, you hear players drafted in the 8th, 9th round. That ended after the 04-05 lockout for the NHL too. But and obviously, and let's also mention what the style of play for the Panthers was coming into this, with hiring Roger Nielsen as the coach. Roger Nielsen had a lot of criticism too in his last stop in New York, especially in '92, with Adam Graves injuring Mario Lemieux in their playoff series, but also the style of play for the NHL in that time, and for the Florida Panthers specifically. That's when goal scoring was not as high, and that was for the
New
dead
Jersey's infamous neutral zone trap.
Yep.
Just the style of play that could win you the game there, and the 93-94 Florida Panthers, an expansion team, and this was before the really favorable expansions that Vegas and Seattle just got, where they at least have a decent enough chance to field a good enough team that could make the playoffs. Of course, Vegas went to the final in the first year, and Seattle would make the playoffs their second season and go in 2 rounds. And but the Panthers came in with Anaheim, not expected to be good. Anaheim did worse than the Panthers. But the Panthers, if you look at the stories of Bill Lindsay and Scott Mellenby, there's quotes that Bobby Clark, who Philadelphia Flyers, 2 Stanley Cup championships, Broad Street Bullies, that's when they got their nicknames and everything like that. So told the team, we're not going to be an effing doormat to the rest of the league. And they weren't. They weren't. They were, up until Vegas, the most successful expansion team in NHL history. Aside from, let's say, the initial 1967 expansion, because they had 2 divisions, and one division was all the expansion teams, and the other division was the original 6. And so one of those teams from the expansion division was going to make the Stanley Cup final. And I think it was the St. Louis Blues initially. So aside from that, quote unquote, the Panthers were the best one.
Yeah. When it comes to realignment and divisions in the history of the NHL,
They've done very well since 67.
If you were to look at the year that the Atlanta Flames and the Vancouver Canucks came into the league, you see the divisions there, it's all sorts of messed up, with Atlanta playing mostly the West teams and then Vancouver playing most of the original 6 Eastern teams too. Yeah. They don't consider geographics. But also, when Gary Bettman came into the league, I mentioned this earlier in the week, it wasn't called the Prince of Wales and the Clarence Campbell Conference anymore. They actually changed it to East-West geographics. They went in that direction too.
Toronto and Detroit were in the Western Conference for the Toronto got out and went to the East, and then it took until I think 10 years ago when they finally did realignment after Atlanta moved to Winnipeg, where Detroit finally moved back into the Eastern Conference, or moved into the Eastern Conference for the first time, really. And funny enough, that's when they were the most successful, was in the West, and when they had all that huge travel and and games in the other time zones. But yeah, it's and the Leafs have not been able to do anything since they moved to the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, there's that famous. I mentioned it. Yeah, there's that famous high stick from Wayne Gretzky on Doug Gilmour in the conference final right before their Stanley Cup final matchup against the Canadiens, which that was the last time a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup there for that. But also, let's talk about something else. Of not only we saw that the Panthers were kind of starting to be Islanders South. They bring in Roger Nielsen from who was with the Rangers, but also the first broadcast crew for the Panthers bring in Jeff Rimmer and Hall of Famer Dennis Potvin. And the story of Jeff Rimmer was that he started with the Baltimore Orioles for pre and post game. I'm not sure the exact years of Earl Weaver. Please educate me if you know the years, Francisco. But I believe maybe he was around that era.
The 70s Baltimore Orioles, especially the early 70s Baltimore Orioles. And I think he was still the Orioles manager when they won in '83 with Cal Ripken Jr.
Yeah,
well, from what I can remember. And of course, the Orioles had spring training in Miami all those years.
Yep, Fort Lauderdale. I remember. I remember meeting Rafael Palmeiro years after all those allegations of his off the field stuff. But Jeff Rimmer from there to becoming the Washington Capitals play-by-play guy for the next 3 years after that. And then he was replaced by after he came to Florida. Do you know who?
I'm not sure.
Kenny Albert. Kenny Albert replaced Jeff Rimmer in Washington as a play-by-play guy right before Jeff Rimmer came to South Florida.
Yeah, and he just now he retired this season because he moved on to Columbus to be with the Blue Jackets, and in South Florida was blessed with Steve Goldstein.
Yep. So yeah, that's and hey, that combo of Jeff Rimmer and Denny Potvin, they were together with the organization for 11 years. So really put a stamp there in from moving to starting in the Miami Arena, then moving to Sunrise and everything. So yeah, big voice to start off the franchise for the Panthers. That's going to do it for part 1 of 2 of this conversation between myself and Florida Panthers historian Francisco Oporta to discuss the history of the Florida Panthers during their time in the Miami Arena. On the next part of this conversation, we are going to discuss opening night of the Florida Panthers in 1993 as they opened their inaugural season. Then we're going to discuss the rat trick. We're going to discuss the first 2 seasons that included an NHL lockout, the very first lockout in the history of the league. And we're going to discuss also the Florida Panthers trip to the 1996 Stanley Cup Final. So make sure you keep an eye out on an ear out for that episode once it drops here for the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey at Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Francisco Oporta, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.